As I was waking up this morning, still drifting somewhere between asleep and awake, I found myself contemplating human nature. The question of whether humanity is good or evil by nature is one that has been argued over for a very long time, and it's an important question to ponder. And I believe that the half-awake state in which I found myself considering this question offers a useful analogy. I think that we can think of humanity as being half awake. At an individual level, some humans are more asleep, while others are more awake. But as a species, we're half awake. My view is that, by nature, humanity is divine, but that humanity has fallen asleep and is in the process of slowly awakening to its true divine nature. By sleep, I mean ignorance of one's true nature. Plato says that to know the good is to do the good. I say that to know your true nature is to act in accordance with your true nature. Plato is only right if it turns out that a person's true nature is the good. I believe Plato is right. In my view, the good is the one, and we are all manifestations of the one. The Buddha, I believe, expressed something very similar when he taught that ignorance is the root cause of suffering. In ignorance of their true nature, humans think, speak, and act in ways that are not in harmony with their true nature. The result is disharmony, discord, division, conflict, hatred, violence, pain, and suffering. If humans are violent by nature, then there is no hope whatsoever of ever having a peaceful and nonviolent human society. So if anyone believes that humans are nothing more than beasts, they cannot rationally promote the ideal of a peaceful and nonviolent society. I can't emphasize this point strongly enough. But not everyone is rational. Many people hold irrational and contradictory beliefs. And ironically, many of those who hold such highly irrational beliefs imagine themselves to be champions of rationalism. And if anyone challenges their irrational beliefs or brings attention to the internal contradictions in their beliefs, they attack that person by accusing them of being irrational. After all, they have named themselves rationalists. They have named their position rationalism. And so to label their critics as anti-rationalists is nothing more than tautology. One characteristic of irrational people is that they desperately desire to shelter themselves from criticism. I'm digressing from my main topic a bit, but it's a tangent worth going off on. I encourage you to be cautious of people who attempt to shelter their irrational ideology from rational criticism by simply naming themselves rationalist and naming their irrational ideology rationalism. Rationalism is not and can never be an ideology. Rationalism and empiricism are just different epistemological positions. Essentially, they're different methods that a person might use to construct an ideology. They are not ideologies in and of themselves. If a person uses the tools of science to arrive at certain conclusions about reality, and then they create an ideology based on those conclusions, and then they choose to name their ideology science, they will probably accuse anyone who criticizes their ideology of being anti-science. But this is no different from accusing someone of being anti-math for pointing out that you've made errors in solving a math problem. The fallacy is in conflating the tools you've used to attempt to solve the problem with the solution you've arrived at. If someone says that your answer is incorrect, that doesn't mean they're saying the tools are invalid. If you're a mathematician, that means you attempt to solve a problem using the tools of mathematics. It doesn't mean that the answer you arrive at is math itself, and that anyone who questions your answer is questioning math itself. And if they use the tools of mathematics to demonstrate that your answer is incorrect, that doesn't mean they're using math to disprove math. They're simply using math to show you where you fell into error. And the same is true with science and rationalism. Whether you use the tools of math, science, or philosophy to construct your ideology, it's important to remember that tools are only as good as the craftsman who wields them. Even a skilled mathematician will occasionally make an error in his calculation. Even a leading scientist may overlook a flaw in the design of his experiment, or may incorrectly interpret experimental data. Even the most rational philosopher may fail to see the fatal flaw in their reasoning that has led them to an irrational conclusion. Personally, I value math, science, and philosophy. But I recognize mathematicians, scientists, and philosophers as fallible human beings. And so I will continue to criticize the ideologies they construct, whether they construct those ideologies using the tools of math, science, or philosophy. I consider both empiricism and rationalism to be valid. But whether someone makes a claim based on empirical evidence or rational arguments, I will choose to accept or reject their claim based on my own examination of the evidence offered and the arguments made. And if I find something to criticize, I will offer my criticism. And I won't be called an anti-rationalist for using the tools of reason to expose the flaws in the reasoning of so-called rationalists. Any true rationalist would receive my rational criticism with gratitude and humility. It's important to remember that the aim of both rationalism and empiricism is knowledge, not belief. Whether an individual seeks knowledge through the empirical or rational method, or a combination of the two, he should keep in mind that he is only forming beliefs. Even if he is forming his beliefs based on reason and evidence, he is still only forming beliefs. Maybe his beliefs are based on evidence instead of blind faith, but they're still beliefs. Maybe his beliefs are based on reason instead of on emotion or sense perceptions, but they are still beliefs. I've heard academic philosophers formally define knowledge as true and justified belief. Empiricists may attempt to justify their belief through inductive logic, and rationalists may attempt to justify their belief through deductive logic. Empirico-rationalists may attempt to justify their belief through both inductive and deductive logic, and I think this is the best approach. But in all three cases, there is a dangerous tendency to mistake justified belief for true knowledge. I certainly admit that justified belief is better than unjustified belief. But the man who thinks he knows what he does not know is a fool. A wise man knows what he doesn't know. Let's suppose a man who calls himself a rationalist publishes articles and books promoting his ideology. Let's suppose he spends millions of words offering rational justifications for his beliefs. And let's say that at least many of his beliefs are indeed rationally justified and appear to be true. But maybe other people point out contradictions or logical fallacies in a few of his arguments. Or maybe they present a counter-argument or contradictory evidence that calls one of his conclusions into question. If he is a genuine lover of truth, who has a spirit of humility, he will acknowledge the very likely possibility that he may have been at least slightly wrong about at least a few points. It would be a true miracle if any man or group of men could write dozens of books containing millions of words, expressing opinions on a broad range of topics, without being even a little bit wrong about anything at all. And surely a truly rational person will be skeptical of such miraculous claims. Of course, if a few holes are pointed out in some philosopher's body of work, this doesn't diminish the value of his contribution to philosophy. If Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Leibniz, Hegel, Jung, or Nietzsche got a few things wrong, this doesn't take anything away from the fact that they were geniuses who got many things right. Imagine that someone discovers a large piece of gold. Now let's imagine that someone else comes along, examines their gold, and discovers that there are some impurities in it. Does this make the gold worthless? Certainly not. If the impurities are removed, the gold will be even more valuable. And this brings us back to the original topic. The true divine nature of humanity can be compared to pure gold. But the pure gold of humanity's true divine nature has become corrupted. This is what every great spiritual tradition teaches in one form or another. The Gnostic tradition teaches that man is a spiritual being and that our spirits have become imprisoned in the world of matter. The Gnostic tradition also teaches that the world of matter is ruled over by archons, who want to keep mankind in ignorance in order to maintain power and control over them. Whether or not you have any interest in Gnosticism, this Gnostic teaching contains a valuable insight into the nature of those who hold power or desire to have power over others. Those who rule always have an incentive to keep those they rule over in a state of ignorance. I believe that the saying, "knowledge is power," is true. So it logically follows that those with more knowledge have power over those with less knowledge. So those who wish to maintain power over others will want to limit their knowledge. To limit their knowledge is to limit their power. This is also one of the reasons I believe people instinctively feel threatened when their beliefs are challenged. If what they believe to be true is shown to be false, then they don't actually know what they thought they knew. They feel as if they've been stripped of knowledge, even though it was false knowledge. And remember, knowledge is power. So they feel as if their power is being taken away from them. In reality, no power is being taken away. No knowledge is being taken away. All that is being taken away from them is the illusion of knowledge. But of course, even the illusion of knowledge gives someone a kind of power, or at least the illusion of power. And the illusion of power is still of value to those who wish to have authority over others. In many ways, the illusion of power is as useful as power itself. If a robber uses an unloaded gun to rob a bank, the effect is exactly the same, as long as everyone believes that the gun is loaded. It creates the illusion that he has the power to shoot anyone who refuses to cooperate and give in to his demands. But I want to go back to something I said in the beginning. If humans are violent by nature, then there is no hope whatsoever of ever having a peaceful and nonviolent human society. So if anyone believes that humans are nothing more than beasts, they cannot rationally promote the ideal of a peaceful and nonviolent society. But those who wish to rule over others through violence find it in their interest to promote the belief that humans are nothing more than beasts. Like Hobbes, they promote the view that human nature is cruel, selfish, and animalistic, and that therefore people need a king or some form of authoritarian government to rule over them. Of course, this is a self-defeating argument, because if human beings are cruel and selfish by nature, then the last thing you would ever want to do is give one human or a group of humans the power to rule over others, or they will use that power cruelly and selfishly. So if anyone argues for a pessimistic view of human nature in order to justify the authority of the state, and they also argue for an optimistic view of government run by benevolent rulers, they are caught in a fatal contradiction. If human nature is violent and selfish, then it's completely irrational to argue that if a human or group of humans is given the power to rule over other humans, they will not use that power violently and selfishly. If humans are immoral and irrational, then a moral and rational government is impossible. And if humans are moral and rational, then no government is necessary. Of course, very few people have such a black and white view. Most people view human nature as neither purely good nor purely evil. They see humans as neither angels nor demons, but something in between. They see humans as capable of both good and evil. As I said, my view is essentially Gnostic. I say essentially the same thing that all the great spiritual traditions say, in one way or another, which is that our true nature is divine and good, but that somehow we've fallen and forgotten our true nature. As I said before, humanity is half asleep. Some are more or less awake than others. Some are on a higher level of consciousness than others, just like some are more intelligent than others. When I say more conscious, I mean more aware of and in tune with their true nature and their true will. Again, my view is that to know your true self is to know the good. And like Plato says, to know the good is to do the good. So if we say that someone is on a higher level of consciousness, it follows from this that they should also be more moral and virtuous. This is only to say that if a person has reached a high stage of spiritual evolution, we should see evidence of this in that person's words and actions. Of course, we should also keep in mind that even a person who's at a lower stage of spiritual evolution may pretend to be moral and virtuous in order to win the approval of others and avoid their disapproval. And so we judge an individual's character by his words and actions, even though we realize that we can never truly know another individual's heart or his inner thoughts and motives. It's also worth pointing out that intelligence and spiritual illumination are not exactly the same thing. It seems to me that there may be a strong correlation between the two, but a person with a much higher than average IQ may not necessarily have achieved a higher level of consciousness or a higher stage of spiritual evolution. I think it's a mistake to confuse one for the other. I do think that the two often tend to be related, and I believe this has to do with the relationship between biological and spiritual evolution, which I've discussed in a previous talk. But a high degree of intellectual development is not always an indication of a high degree of spiritual development. Even if a person is highly intelligent, and even if they're able to intelligently discuss topics related to spirituality, illumination, and gnosis, if they are lacking in virtue, they are surely not enlightened. I've encountered many very intelligent people who show through their words and actions that they're full of envy and wrath and other deficiencies of virtue. And they use left-wing rhetoric to stir up envy and wrath in others, turning them toward the path of vice and away from the path of virtue. Such people are not illuminated, and they're not working toward the spread of illumination. And anyone who claims to be working toward the spread of illumination is a hypocrite if they support big government and attempt to legitimize the authority of the state and justify the use of state force. Those who are given the power to rule over others never give up their power voluntarily. They always seek to maintain it. And they seek to maintain their power by keeping those they rule over in ignorance. So by its very nature, state power is in opposition to the spread of illumination. You either believe that humanity should be ruled over, or you believe that humanity should be liberated. These are irreconcilable positions, unless you engage in some serious doublethink and convince yourself that freedom is slavery. No authoritarian state will ever assist humanity in its spiritual evolution, because, as I said, by its very nature, the state will always strive to keep humanity in ignorance in order to maintain its power. Those in power will always seek to maintain their power. It doesn't make any difference who you give the power to. Power is like a drug. Power is addictive. Power corrupts. If such a thing as a benevolent government were even possible at all, it would quickly become corrupt. Even if you put the most virtuous individuals in power, I believe they would become corrupted by it. This is like saying that if you inject a virtuous man with heroin, he will become addicted to it. The reason a virtuous man doesn't become a heroin addict is that a virtuous man would not use heroin in the first place. It's not because he's somehow immune to its addictive nature. He won't use heroin because he knows that it's an addictive drug and that it's harmful. In the same way, a virtuous man would not accept a government office because he knows that power corrupts and is harmful. When I say power, I mean power over others. Some may say that freedom is a kind of power too. If an individual is powerless to resist those who have power over him, then he won't have freedom. And so some might say that it's possible to think of the power to be free as a second kind of power. The power to be free is related to what some people call negative liberty. What they call positive liberty is related to the first kind of power. I advocate so-called negative liberty, which is simply liberty. I advocate the power to be free from those who desire to have power over you. This means I believe individuals are morally justified in using force to resist those who attempt to use force against them to rob them of their freedom. I'm absolutely against so-called positive liberty. Those who advocate so-called positive liberty are actually advocating the right of certain individuals to have power over other individuals and to use force against them if they refuse to submit to their authority. But I don't use those terms because I believe they distort the truth. There's no such thing as positive and negative liberty. Like I said, so-called positive liberty is the power to force others to do what you want them to do, whether they want to or not. So-called negative liberty is just liberty. It's freedom from those who desire to have power over you. But it isn't the freedom to have power over others who desire to be free. The desire to be free from those who desire to have power over you is in alignment with what I call the true self, which is the true nature of humanity. The desire to have power over those who desire to be free is not in alignment with the true self or with the true nature of humanity. It arises out of ignorance. An individual who desires power over others is on the side of darkness and wishes to keep others in darkness as well. An individual who loves freedom is on the side of light and wishes to lead others toward the light as well. Archons desire power. Gnostics seek liberation. The view that humans are selfish, violent beasts who must be beaten, locked in cages, and ruled over by masters is a view that serves the rulers of humanity and justifies their power. And they use their power to keep humanity ignorant of their true nature, so that humans will behave like beasts. And the most beastly among them are those who rule over the rest. They desire to shape man in their own image. Do you see how that works? What if what we observe in the world today all the violence and irrationality, is not a product of human nature at all? What if it's the product of the forceful suppression of the true nature of humanity? If you think that human nature is violent and irrational, you'll probably think that the solution is to suppress human nature even more. You'll want to create even more systems of control. You'll want an even bigger and more powerful government. If you think that human nature is essentially good, you'll think the solution is to liberate humanity from all artificial systems of control. But I don't necessarily advocate attempting to accomplish this overnight. It's possible that an animal kept in captivity for too long may need some kind of transition process before being completely ready to be released back into nature. Of course, those who desperately desire to cling to power will try to convince you that this process should be much slower than it needs to be. I want to abolish all governments and systems of control fairly quickly. By that, I mean over a period of just a few years, or a single generation at most. I'm in favor of gradually shrinking the size and power of the government. I believe the best way to do this is to starve the beast by cutting taxes, eventually all the way to zero. I support shifting the necessary functions of government to private businesses, private charities, and various voluntary community organizations. Needless to say, this means the complete elimination of all government subsidies to big corporations. It means the end of central banks and their monopoly on money creation and the issuing of fiat currency. And as the power of government shrinks until it eventually disappears completely, corporations and private moneyed interest will no longer be able to use their wealth to bribe politicians to pass laws and regulations that rig the game in their favor, which will result in a truly free market and a level playing field. In the context of a voluntary society, capitalism serves the alchemical function of transmuting base qualities, such as greed, which arise from ignorance, into golden qualities. All criticisms of capitalism, if properly analyzed, are revealed to be, in actuality, criticisms of state power, which corrupts the free economy and turns it into a rigged system. But I've discussed this elsewhere. I'd like to end by encouraging you to continue to seek and spread the knowledge that leads to liberation and dissolves the power of ignorance that holds humanity in captivity. Peace.